Hello again, fellow audiophiles. I am Wave Theory, and this is the linear tube audio MicroZOTL MZ3 speaker amplifier, headphone amplifier, and a preamplifier all in one unit. This is $3,700 US. It is a loan to me from a friend of the channel. LTA, I have been in contact with LTA about some of their amplifiers and how their technology works and all of those sorts of things, but they have done a good job of avoiding trying to influence my opinion on this piece or any of their gear in one way or the other, so all thoughts that you are about to hear are mine and mine alone. So let's go ahead and do shameless self-promotion, and then we will come back on the other side and dive into the review of the MZ3. Hey. Not quite shameless self-promotion yet. Want to interject something really quick after that intro. After I filmed the review, I shared it with LTA, and they came back with a couple of really interesting comments that I want to include in this video that I think you should see. I just think there's some really helpful information in there for you, the viewers. So a couple of times in the video, I will jump in and expand on a point, some slight changes they have made to things, etc., so that you are up to date. But otherwise, I'm just going to add those in there. I'm not going to change anything about the original review and just let you see it as is. And to LTA's credit, they never once asked me to change anything. These are just notes and then my decision to come back after the fact and share these with you because a couple of them are really important. And one of them is the name of this product. The way they pronounce MicroZOTL is actually more like MicroZOTL to kind of get it to rhyme with the word total. So the correct pronunciation of the name of this product is the linear tube audio MicroZOTL 3 amplifier at that point, okay? But LTA MZ3 still works. All right, let's get on with that shameless self-promotion thing. Hey, thanks for watching this video. Please remember to hit that like button, and if you haven't, please subscribe. Also, I have a Patreon set up so that you can help support me on a monthly basis, and I've set up a PayPal donation so that you can help me out in that way too if a monthly subscription does not make sense for you. Links for all of that, including the benefits, in the description below. Please check those out. All right, on with the show. All right, the MZ3 is a vacuum tube design here, and it has two sets of tubes on it. The stock configuration is two 12AT7 input tubes, and then two 12SN7 output tubes. All that, and you can adjust to 6 SN7s if you want, if you switch some jumpers around. I will leave LTA's website to explain all of that in further detail. Okay, so I mentioned that the full name of this thing is the MicroZOTL MZ3. So OTL in the context of vacuum tubes generally means output transformerless. Okay, now as I understand it, and I did not do a super deep dive on the technology here, so don't expect a thorough recounting here, but the MicroZOTL approach that LTA uses is OTL, but it is not quite OTL classic. It is a little bit different. Again, I am not going to go into the full details of what that means, how they achieved it, and all of the advantages. I will link to the website that they put up where they talk about all of this, and if you are interested in learning about that, you can go and read to your heart's content there. I am more going to focus in this review of things that are more interesting to me insofar as what's it like to actually use this unit and how does it sound, okay? So I'm going to spend a lot more time on those. And so then it usually just goes by the shorter name LTA MZ3, so you'll hear me call it the MZ3 here a lot in this review. And again, $3,700 US is the MSRP. Some other measurements, some statistics. What is the word that I am looking for here? Specifications. There we go. Okay, some other specs on this is that it is rated at a 1 watt output at 4 ohms, so we're most likely talking a speaker load there, okay, at 1% total harmonic distortion, and then that drops to a half watt at 14 ohm output at also a 1% THD measurement there. So I will show you the unit tour of this unit here in a moment in a separate clip. where I show you that, and its outboard standalone linear power supply unit here. I'll look at both of those as part of the unit tour here in a moment. And so let's also talk about like the fact that it can be, you know, up to a 1 watt speaker output here. Like, what does that mean? 1 watt does not sound like a lot. So you do want to lean towards more sensitive speakers if you're going to use this as a speaker amp. And LTA recommends speakers that are 105 decibel sensitivity if you are going to use these for critical listening. If you're in a small room, they say you can get away with 97 decibel sensitivity. You can, of course, play around with that. I did try, I am primarily a headphone user, so the vast majority of the time that I did critical listening with this unit was as a headphone amp. But I did try some speakers in near field, using it as a near field speaker amplifier as well. And I will get into all of that here as we progress through the review. So I think that is a lot of the features and the specs of note here. So let's go ahead and look at that clip where I talk about the build. All right, we'll quickly go handheld here to do a unit tour of the MZ3. We've got the power supply box here, which is a separate box from the amplifier unit itself. Okay, and so front panel of the power supply box, basically nothing. I'll show you how deep it is in just a second. And then here is the amplifier, where we have power button, input selection. There are 3 RCA inputs that I will show you in a moment. Remote control sensor, volume knob right here. It has a digital volume control and volume display going on right here. So you get a numeric value for the volume level that you're set at here. And then we have a switch to select either the headphone output, which you see right here is 1/4 inch single-ended, or to use the speaker output / use this in pre-amplifier mode. All right, let me pause this and show you the above view. All right, from above here, the power supply unit here you can see is rather deep. Okay, at least compared to the amplifier. And then here in the amplifier, we see the openings for the vacuum tubes. Okay, and so forth. And yeah, nice, you know, all metal aluminum, okay, kind of chassis material here with ventilation holes. And you can kind of see some of the circuit stuff going on in there. I'm not going to open this up, but that's what it looks like here on the top. All right, back panels. We see that on the power supply box here, we have just a master rocker power switch, the power input here, and then we have this what looks like a 4-pin male XLR kind of connector. It basically is that, but it is a proprietary power cable system that connects to the similar looking input over here on this one, and LTA very thoughtfully sends you the umbilical cord that does in fact look like it has 2 female 4-pin XLR connectors on it. Okay, to use here. This cord right here, I will show you the length when I get back on camera. It is probably long enough if you have a standard height desk, okay, to plug into the back of this unit and then let the other end droop down to the floor and put this on the floor. But if you have one of those variable height desks that do sit stand kinds of things, like that's not going to work for that. Okay, all right. The back panel of the amplifier portion, we see the speaker terminals here because, again, this is a speaker amplifier as well. We have 2 preamp outputs right here. So if you want to route these to a subwoofer or just throughput to another amplifier of some sort, okay, here you go, single-ended connections there. And then we have 3 RCA single-ended inputs there, which are selectable on the front. So again, we also see this is a completely single-ended unit and no balanced connections at all. All right, but there is the unit tour. Let's get back to me on camera talking about more things. First interjection is that power supply unit. So the unit that I had for review that was, again, bought by a friend of the channel and then loaned to me is an older unit in the MZ3 line. And since this unit has been produced, LTA has reworked the power supply, at least the casing for it. And I was told by their representative that the new power supply is a smaller footprint now than even the amplifier itself. So it's a little bit more placement friendly, but still not completely so. So just keep that in mind for two reasons here in this review. Is one, that if you were to buy a brand new MZ3, the power supply unit would not be the big rectangular unit that I showed you in this video. It would be a smaller unit that is smaller in footprint than the amplifier box itself. And then as the sonic impressions roll around here later on in the video, do realize that this is also a little bit older unit. And as is the case with just about any product line in any industry ever, small changes can happen over the course of its life cycle and its usage time and so forth. I was told that there really has not been much in the way of change to sonics, but just keep in mind again that this is an older unit. Here is that proprietary umbilical power cord that I just talked about. It is that long, which from this I haven't measured it, looks to be about a meter or roughly 3 feet in the English system there. It is just long enough, I think, that for a number of desks or gear racks, it will be okay to put the power supply unit down on the floor or on a bottom shelf and then put your amplifier unit up on a higher shelf or up on the desktop. I mentioned the sit-stand desk in my unit tour clip there just a moment ago because my main system desk is on one of those raise up and down sit-stand kind of deals for lumbar reasons, okay, and sciatic reasons, okay, but this cord would not be long enough for the power supply to sit on the floor and then for the amp to be on the desk and then to accommodate a use case like that. So the two different footprints that you just saw also means that the power supply and the amplifier really do not stack at all. And so you do need to think about how you're going to place these units in there. Like LTA talks up on their website, the small footprint of the amplifier, and that's true. The amplifier section itself has a rather small and like desk-friendly footprint to it, but the existence of that other and oddly shaped power supply unit of it does mean that you have to give some thought as to where everything is going to go and are they close enough to each other that you can comfortably use this cord, or you're just going to have to get a longer or maybe shorter cord depending on what your situation is. All right. So with that, let's turn our attention to the sound, and I will list the gear that I reviewed to test the MZ3 with here. And I'm not going to hold it up a lot because it's a $3,700 unit. It's not particularly heavy, but I just don't want to be jostling it around all that much. Okay, so again, I am primarily a headphone user, and so most of my evaluation came from using this as a headphone amplifier. So source gear for this would have been primarily Roon, okay, using either lossless or high-resolution FLAC files or local DSD files, or streaming lossless / high-res FLAC files from Qobuz. And then from there, the primary listening setup from there would have been through my Sonor Ultra Rendu streamer, which was feeding a Singer SU2 and now a Singer SU6 DDC. A review of the SU6 is pending. Okay, digital to digital converter there. And then from there, connected via AES to my Berkeley Alpha Series 2 DAC, or to other DACs that I have had in for review. Coax SPDIF went from the SU2/SU6 into the Lampezator Amber 3, which I reviewed recently. Coax also went into the Vice DAC 204, which I reviewed recently. And then I also used a Cord 2U DDC connected direct USB to my desktop PC, and then a USB input into the Lampezator Amber 3, and then into the MZ3. And then I also used that Vice DAC 204 direct USB into my computer, and then into the single-ended output of that into here as well. And then I also tried my Cord Hugo 2, which was fed by its matching Cord 2 Go streamer. Okay, that into here as well. So a variety of DACs there to use. And again, this is only single-ended input, so I had to use the single-ended output, single-ended connections of all of those DACs that I just named. All right, so then headphones that I powered with this thing include the HiFiMan HE1000 V2 Stealth Magnet Edition, which they are just now calling the HE1000 Stealth, apparently. Okay, but I have a review for that somewhat recently, which I will link to, and this was one of the amps that I used to test that one, along with the HE1000 SE, the older Stealth Magnet Edition of the HE1000 series. Also tried the Susvara on here. I tried my original Focal Utopia. The Rawson Rad Zero got some run on this one. I tried my Focal Radiance a little bit. I tried my Fostex TH900 Mark II with the Lawton Purple Heart Chambers on here. And let's see what else made it in there. That's probably enough to give you an idea of the level of stuff that we're talking about that I tried here. All right, and then as I mentioned, speakers, I have a pair of Yamo C93 Mark IIs on my desktop, which are powering a bit of a chimera of a subwoofer now that was a Polk PSW 505. The built-in plate amplifier of it died. I picked up an El Cheapo Fozzy Audio or something like that. Subwoofer amplifier to replace that. Works fine on my desktop system where I don't need a ton of output. So that was the system that I used. The speaker system that I used for these. I ran the preamp output of the MZ3 into that little sub amp that I just mentioned and let its internal crossover do the filtering out of the high frequencies from there. So that's a lot of test gear. All right, let's talk about the sound then. The sound of the MZ3 is overall very good. It does vary quite a bit with pairings, particularly, again, mostly a headphone user with headphone pairings. It stands to reason that speaker pairings are also on the sensitive side, but I didn't really check all of that. So I'm going to talk mostly about headphones. Now, it's like kind of stock normal default sound signature, if you will, from a perceived frequency response type of standpoint, is that I don't want to call it mid-forward, but it is a little bit mid-centric. To me, the star of the show, like, and what the frequency range seems to accentuate a little bit, is the mid-range. The reason I don't want to call it mid-forward is because the tonal balance through the mid-range is quite strong, and so the whole of the mid-range frequency range is just brought up just a little bit, where to me mid-forward often means that there is a peak or something like that in the mid-range that is causing a certain, sliver of the mid-range to stand forward a little bit more. This isn't quite like that. Okay, the bass and the treble are well extended and decently present, but they're like the ears are not drawn to either of those directions there. Now, the bass is going to come across to some as a little bit lean. Okay, so again, well-extended bass, well-controlled bass, but there's not a ton of presence to it, or rumble or that sort of thing. Okay, so it's not a bass heads amp. Okay, so that's like the frequency response on its own as I gleaned from across different sources, like what was going on here. You can really flesh out the sound a lot of this though. Like you can bring some of that bass presence and oomph and rumble back into the sound of this if you have a DAC that brings a lot of robust low end to it, like the Lampezator Amber 3 that I mentioned. That DAC is very warm, it is very full and robust in the low end, it slams pretty hard, it rumbles quite a bit, and still is very articulate and well controlled in the low end, and that comes through on this amp. It really helps fill out and flesh out the sound in the low end of the MZ3. So all is not lost if you hear that lean in the bass description that I just gave. You can help it with DAC pairings. Okay, but other than that, like the resolution slash detail retrieval on this thing, really good. The overall holography of the spatial presentation, really good. You've got excellent imaging and separation going on laterally. You've got great depth and layering going on in the depth dimension and that sort of thing. The very spatially holographic and accurate in its presentation there. And the soundstage never really stood out to me as particularly huge or small. It's just kind of what it needs to be, which may sound like a cop-out of a description, but this is one of those pieces of gear to me that just never really stood out as being overly huge in soundstage nor overly small. It's kind of played it right down the middle on that one. And then the timbre is really good. Again, the overall tonal balance, even though the mid-range to me sounds a little bit accentuated as compared to the slightly lean bass, and not necessarily rolled off, but maybe just a little bit less present treble there. But we have excellent tonal balance or tonality through the entire frequency range. There is very good relationship in terms of how it controls the relationship between fundamental frequencies and the harmonics and overtones of that fundamental. So everything sounds very well tonally balanced throughout the whole frequency range. And then the timing aspects of timbre that to me include attack and decay are also very well controlled and delivered on this amplifier. And so I think some of the true strengths of its ability, at least through headphones that I listened to, are the resolution. And then the resolution does not sound forced or overly forward or overly laid back at all. It has a very natural presentation to it. The holography of the spatial presentation in terms of where it places sounds within the sound field and then crucially putting space between those sounds. And then the timbre. It has a very lifelike, natural timbre to my ear most of the time. Now let me come back and unpack that most of the time statement there, because as I just mentioned how you can flesh out the low-end sound of this with a very robust low-end DAC, you can, I got mixed results with headphone pairings on here, and even from a frequency response standpoint. So that mid-range accentuation here is good for some headphone pairings, less good for other headphone pairings. Okay, so something that is already very mid-range forward to a fault, in my opinion. The example that is coming to my head at the moment is the Rosin Rad Zero, which I did a review of not long ago, link in the description. That headphone to my ear is too mid-forward in its stock tuning. The MZ3 does not do anything to save it. If anything, it pushes that mid-range forward just a little bit more because of the slight mid-range accentuation to its house sound signature here, or its bass sound signature, I should say. So I did not like that pairing with the Rad Zero like at all. Just didn't like it at all because that went from already too forward mid-range on that headphone to really far too forward mid-range on that headphone. However, other headphones that have a bit of a dip in the mid somewhere, the biggest example of this I'm thinking of is that new HiFiMan HE1000 Stealth, aka HE1000 V2 Stealth Magnet Edition, which again I have a review of recently, link in the description. That one does have a little bit of a dip through about the middle of the mid-range, okay, in there, and this amplifier matched really well to that, brought some of that mid-range presence up, smoothed it out a bit, made the mid-range on that HE1000 Stealth sound a lot more natural, a lot more full, a lot more fully fleshed out, okay, in its presentation. Similar results on the HE1000 SE. That one is not as dipped in the mids as the HE1000 Stealth is, okay, but similarly, it does have a little bit of a perceptive dip in there too, and the MZ3 brought that forward, evened it out a lot more. The TH900 that I mentioned there, so the TH900 is a very V-shaped line, or really the entirety of the TH900 series, very V-shaped. okay, in its frequency response. And so it can sound a little bit thin and a little bit not quite tonally balanced through the mids. And they also can get very sharp and shrill in the treble when not properly controlled. I really liked my TH900 on this amplifier. It smoothed out the mid-range presentation a lot. It got the sibilance and the sharpness of the TH900 under control well. Sounded really good. Okay, the Susvara, I don't think this has enough power for it. It just didn't quite work for me. The mid-range was pushed a little bit too forward. It just sounded, and the Susvara just had a little bit of that soft sound that it can have when it is not properly powered. However, the notoriously picky Focal Utopia, I have the original version on hand here, matched to this thing really, really well. The frequency response of the Utopia became much more even and well tonally balanced than it can on some other amps. It never really got sharp or harsh or angry with me on this amplifier. I really, really liked the combination of the MZ3 and the Utopia. I liked the combination even more when I stuck the Amber 3 DAC in that chain, although it's really the amp that controls the Utopia very well. Okay, the MZ3 just pairs well with that headphone, but you bring that Amber 3 in there with that chain too, and it got so good that I did an episode of my Super Synergies Shorts series, link in the description below, of the Amber 3, MZ3, and Utopia, because I spent a lot of time listening to that combo. It was wonderful. Last interjection, and I didn't really need to say this other than to say that the LTA people agree with me that the Utopia sounds wonderful on the MZ3. And they also added that the Meze 109 Pro does really well. I have the Meze 109 Pro in for review. That one just recently came in, so I really didn't plug it into the MZ3 at all. The friend of the channel who lent me the MZ3 says I can hang on to it for a little while longer, so I will make sure to try the 109 Pro on the MZ3. But thanks for watching, everybody. Okay. What else in there? Staying with Focal then, the Radiance didn't sound terrible on this one, but it was not my favorite pairing. Still sounded pretty good, but the Radiance to me already has pretty good tonal balance through the mids, and so the mid-forwardness of, again, I don't want to say that, but the mid-range accentuation of the MZ3 pushed the mids forward on the Radiance just a little bit too much for my liking. Similar to what it did to the Rad Zero, but not to the extent where it became as offensive as the Rad Zero was to me in that regard. Okay, so speakers then, like, again, only with those, you know, fairly budget Yamaha C93 Mark IIs on the desktop setting, but a lot of spatial holography there. It had the control in a near field setting, so it never really worried about volume. It got plenty loud and still sounded clean and all of that, again, in a near field setting. So no complaints there, but that's about all that I can say in terms of speaker sound with this amp. Okay, so to me, the takeaways here is that this can be a really wonderful listening experience, but you do need to be careful about building out a signal chain around this amplifier. It has a bit of a mid-range accentuation, and so you need to be careful about matching that to headphones. It will push the mid-range of some headphones pretty far forward, but the flip side of that is if the headphone is a little bit too late back in the mids, it can bring that back into line, more to the liking of many through the mids there too. It is not particularly slammy or rumbly or dynamic in the low end, but there again, a pairing thing can help out, because with my Hugo 2, with my Berkeley, with the Vice DAC 204, like, this always sounded good. It always sounded resolving and holographic with excellent timbre, but it didn't always have the low end oomph or that fully fleshed out bottom end that I like, or sound particularly dynamic or punchy in the low end. But I put this on the Amber 3 and all of that came in spades. So you do need to look at both ends of where you plug this thing in, or signal change, in terms of the experience that you're going to get out of this. But you get it the right chain going, and this becomes a critical piece of a very, very good sounding listening system. Okay, it really does. It's fairly easy to use. I like that it has 3 inputs, so you can connect 3 sources, 2 different DACs if you want. You can connect your turntable, no problem. I like that it has 2 preamp outputs, so you can go to either another, a more powerful speaker amplifier. It's easy to connect subs, subs in stereo, all of that kind of stuff. So it has a fair amount of connection flexibility in terms of inputs and outputs, provided that all of your connections are single-ended. The single-ended nature of it is fine. I want to be clear that a well-designed balanced design and a well-designed single-ended design, like, there's not going to be a clear better there. Both topologies can sound excellent, but in terms of connection and pairing, it's just another way that you need to be careful with the MZ3 connecting this thing to a DAC. Okay, in particular, because many DACs out there anymore are balanced and they sound better from their balanced outputs than they do their single-ended outputs. The Vice DAC 204 that I just did a review of is a prime example of this. Okay, you've got to use the single-ended connections, or you're going to have to get outboard balanced to single-ended conversion, and do that properly. Don't just buy cheap XLR or RCA cables. Okay, that does not handle the grounding well. You can short things out. Bad things can happen. Don't do it. Okay, get a proper, ground handling balanced to single-ended converter if you want that. But the point is here is that the single-ended only inputs on this thing do put another constraint on that signal chain building that I just mentioned, and so you as a potential buyer need to keep that in mind. All right, so I think I've said what I need to say about the MZ3. More often than not, I really enjoyed the listening experience. That Amber 3 MZ3 Utopia chain was just audio bliss. Loved that. Wish I could hang on to that signal chain longer. Okay, but the performance ceiling on this thing is really high. Even though it's not classically neutral, even though it is a little bit lean in the low end and all of that kind of stuff, it still has a lot of strength. It has a lot going for it. And again, it can be the amplifier and a very flexible one in terms of ergonomics once you get all the single-ended stuff sorted out in your listening system. So I will go ahead and leave it there. Thanks for watching. Please leave a like, a comment, subscribe to my channel if you haven't. Check out my PayPal, my Patreon, and do all of those things you do to support YouTube channels. And as always, enjoy the music.